Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to those of you around the world. Welcome to Trading Rebellion with Trade the Chain and Market Rebellion. My name is Nick Mancini, Director of Research at Trade the Chain, joined by CJ and Monty, Senior Research Analysts at Market Rebellion. We are here to break down everything going on in crypto, TradeFi, macro, and every buzzword in the financial sector that you can think of. So a lot of news. We had FOMC yesterday. A lot of Twitter action. BlackRock made some crypto news today as well, and a litany of other companies that probably don't want to be in the news too. So let's go ahead and go over those first before we head into FOMC, and then CJ, Monty, and I are going to break down the assets that we think you should be longing, probably none, shorting, probably a lot, and the assets that you probably should just ignore for the time being. So let's go ahead and just kick it off with some of this news. So while it's not the most important news, I figured it would be important to cover because it's been, kind of a hot crypto Twitter topic, if you will. And these guys were in front of the SEC. So we're talking about this Prometheum company, which is apparently a registered broker dealer with the SEC. They were in front of the House Financial Services Committee earlier in the week making testimony. And the weird thing about it is the company is quite sketchy. They apparently, it's the same people behind the Long Island iced tea company rebranding to like Long Island blockchain company back in 2020, 2021. They've got a lot of Chinese Communist Party connections, 1.5 million sales and commissions to them, which is, if you're paying millions to the Chinese for raising capital, it's generally going to be looked at with a fine-tooth comb. And there's Senator. I would highly recommend actually looking at this tweet and listening to Representative Flood's testimony or questioning towards Prometheum, because he kind of basically solves the question in the air. To kind of fully explain it, Prometheum, is a registered broker dealer with the SEC, but they can't allow trading for Bitcoin or Ethereum, and they cannot actually broker crypto assets to the public. They only have a very small subset of these assets, and they basically seem to be some sort of SEC or government plant to be like, look at these guys, they can come in and register, but everyone else is like, if you know anything about investigatory journalism, there's something really off about this company and their people. So CJ, Monty, don't want to spend too much time on this, but any thoughts from you guys in reference to the SEC parading around what seems to be a very sketchy company and using them as the precipice of, proper regulatory, action?
Yeah, it's odd. I've been in crypto for over a decade and I pay attention to basically everything. And Prometheum is entirely irrelevant for the SEC to be wasting any time, like, bringing them in front of Congress and or grilling them with these questions. It's pointless to me. Like, why do it with Prometheum? Like, most people haven't even heard of this company, let alone, their importance to the crypto space. So this to me is just like, it does seem weird. I don't know why the SEC is using this fringe company that no one's heard of when there's bigger fish to be fried, quite frankly.
What was the one that was just like a month ago? Bits Lotto?
Biz Lotto, yeah, the Russian exchange, I think.
Equally comparable. Like who even has heard of any of this? So
yeah, I think the sad part of the story is that, just taking Coinbase and Kraken, like whether or not you agree with the SEC or don't with their enforcement actions, I think we can all look under the hood and say the people operating the company, the way that they raise the capital, the way that they're using and managing their capital is not nefarious and working with potentially, bad nation states and coming and plenty of previous bad dealings in terms of regulatory affairs. So it's just sad, I think, is where a lot of people are, but it's also an amusing story because we can, it's more fodder against the SEC in terms of them trying to, finesse this nonsensical line of reasoning as to why this company is good and this company is bad, so whatever. We'll definitely update as we learn more, because again, I'd recommend watching the testimony, reading up on this. It's certainly interesting, and you'll probably hear more about it in the future. So another big news, it's going to relate to something we discussed with FOMC and altcoins, is like Robinhood, Celsius will be selling all altcoins from customers except custody and withhold accounts starting July 1st, and we'll be converting them into Bitcoin and Ethereum. So just quick question here, because I'm kind of reading this from two ways. And to start, we assume that those assets will likely be, ADA, Matic, Solana, probably the main ones that the SEC is naming in these lawsuits against Coinbase and Binance, but probably going to be some other altcoins too. Now, the weird thing is that they're going to be converting them into Bitcoin and Ethereum. So does this, bolster potentially Bitcoin and Ethereum in the near term? Because when I see this, I'm thinking, market makers are going to get ahead of this and sell the alts. But are they going to buy Bitcoin and Ethereum, at least in the short term? Because we have to, the market's going to try and right size this trade in terms of creating a fair price, fair price. But you get what I'm saying. The market's going to price it in. So pricing it in is likely down for alts, but is this up for Bitcoin and Ethereum, CJ or Monty?
I'd say it's hard to assume that, because like selling is selling. Simply put, like Bitcoin and ETH will probably go down. Sure, they won't go down as much as the alts, but when you have everybody basically with a deadline to sell, whether it be Robinhood holders who traditionally aren't folks who are going to be, withdrawing to external wallets. I think the appeal of Robinhood, especially with their crypto service, is that it's so easy to use. And I don't think a lot of very technical people use those particular wallets. So I'm not expecting a lot of alts to be withdrawn. They're probably going to get continued to be sold if they haven't already been 90% sold. And then this news around Celsius is kind of just compounding. And I think a nice explanation of why you're seeing so few spot bids. All of these like interim squeezes, if you could even say that we've had some, have been primarily perp driven. Nick, you did a good job kind of breaking that down before the show. But, overall, I think this is just like the summer lull for Bitcoin, very similar to what we saw in 2019 to 2020, following that echo bubble. Keyword is patience for the next 3 months. Probably some much better opportunities to buy alts in July once all of this stuff is kind of over with and the news is kind of passed. Until then, just patience.
Monty?
Yeah, I don't see this having a positive effect on Bitcoin or ETH. Like CJ pointed out, there's just been, and like you pointed out, there's just been a general lack of spot buying for Bitcoin. So all they're converting their, all these altcoins into Bitcoin, I don't expect it to be a positive catalyst, only a negative catalyst for those assets that they're selling, which I think we're already seeing that today. Things like Polkadot's down 5%, Cardano down 4%. So, or
Matic
down 3%,
down a lot as well.
3%. Yeah, Matic. So I think we're seeing people front running this Celsius conversion already. And that commenter points out, the worst thing you can do is announce that you're going to be offloading tokens because it gives everyone a chance to front run you. But then the other guy says, pretty sure they're in bankruptcy court and they have to declare everything that they're going to do. So
is not their tokens.
Yeah. So I don't think they needed to declare that they're going to be selling all these tokens. And they could have sold them before tweeting. It's just odd. And ultimately, I could only see it being a negative catalyst for the assets that have been, roped in with that securities talk, and not a positive catalyst for Bitcoin and ETH.
I tend to agree with you guys. The one thing I just, in terms of spot demand, that could create some sort of temporary signal. Let's say bots, see some Bitcoin, Ethereum actual spot interest, that could spark some sort of temporality. But I do agree with you guys in terms of your outlook. And just to kind of further explain, because we did mention perp interest versus spot interest. And CVD, which is turned into quite the meme from crypto Twitter. The longer you zoom out, you're going to see continual decays from this. So it's never, I never use CVD beyond a 12-hour period. Typically, we'll use it in a 2 to 4 hour period, as I like to focus on when the data is becoming a little bit more normalized. And as we can see here, about an hour and a half ago, it became a little bit normalized, and we saw some divergence, meaning perps took over spot. So spot has just been continually on the downturn, and you can see this entire move up has basically been perps, and spot is selling into the rise. So basically, this can be interpreted in many ways. And it doesn't mean that it will return back down. It means it is more likely to return, lower before moving much higher. But, some exchange market makers will long on perps to fill their spot bids to then sell into it. Sometimes people will long, early, and then spot will catch up. But typically, whenever we see a divergence like this, I typically will observe a rollover in price and for the CVDs to then catch up. So basically, this is just a visualization saying that there's a lot more perp interest than there is spot interest. And that's what CJ and Monty were alluding to. And just looking at, I guess there are some green on this, but if you're actually tracking this, like I've seen a lot of big $1 million plus sales on the Binance and Coinbase spot side. I was not seeing that very much in 2023. So we've entered a bit of a new paradigm in terms of spot sellers. So we'll pause there. We'll probably go over this a little bit more, but let's dig into what was likely the most market impacting news of the week. The Fed pauses interest rate hikes, so no hike yesterday, but implies likely 2 more, potentially 3 more interest rate increases during 2023, which pretty much removes the possibility of a rate cut in 2023, which I believe was really the center of the bull case for this rally. Now, I think CJ disagrees with me a little bit, and I personally thought that we would see more of a correction from equities. We saw a slight one during FOMC, but we're back again above recent highs. So I'd love to get, before we dig into the charts, CJ and Monty, just from a macro zoom out perspective. A lot of the arguments are, if you're still bullish, you're probably not believing the Fed. You're probably bucking the Fed and saying, I think they're giving us BS. I think we're on the right track. If you're bearish, then you're not sitting pretty, but you're at least still tied to this narrative that the Fed is going to do what they say they're going to do. So CJ and Monty, what are you guys thinking? Is the Fed, are you calling the Fed's bluff? Do you think this even matters in terms of bear or bull price action in the near term? What are your thoughts?
I thought it was kind of surprising to see a pause. I did expect them to raise by 25 bips. I thought that would be a little bit more bullish, but obviously they didn't. We had talked about looking at these events, looking for like news failure. And like, for instance, if we would have closed red following FOMC, like that would have been a pretty interesting news failure event, where you could have gotten short and put your stop loss, at the top of that day's high. But we didn't. We had bullish price action just around the day. So there was no action to take, in my opinion. In terms of like looking at the S&P and where the market's going, out, sure, we could correct for a little bit in the beginning, but ultimately I think you have a very large majority of people who are like, I'm very close to capitulating on my shorts, or I have capitulated on my shorts, which has been reflected in a lot of positioning data. But that same cohort of people now, even if they've given up, they're like, well, there's no way I'm buying at these levels. That's probably still going to be, I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's still a lot of money sidelined that could push prices higher. It doesn't have to, but certainly could. Monty, do you have anything a little bit more concrete to say in terms of the rate hikes? I don't have a whole lot. I'm just kind of glad the event's over with and we can focus on the positioning going forward.
Yeah, I think that's like the same thing that I'm feeling. Like, it's now that it's in the rear view, we've had this catalyst out of the way. People have been, talking about it for a while now, but it's in the rear view now. And I think that the fact that we didn't see a rate hike means that we're going to see some continued bullish price action in the interim. If you look at stocks today, like the big tech names, like Microsoft is, closing in on making new highs. Nvidia is, I think, up on the day. But I mean, the fact of the matter is, like, as long as people still try and short these assets, um, they're gonna keep going up because we're seeing essentially is short covering. People trying to buy puts in this market, paint the top, and essentially what happens is, a little bit of bullish news comes in, like the fact that they're pausing rate hikes and price goes up. Those shorts are forced to capitulate, and those puts cover, and price goes up. So I think that's what we've essentially been seeing, and until sentiment switches from which right now, like if you just watch CNBC for 30 minutes, you'll think that like the world is ending and that the market is in the midst of a recession. But the
Okay, I'm
fact of the
sorry,
matter is
Monty, but the segment before we got on here was literally called "quote unquote" the Chaos Kings making money from catastrophes. So you're spot on. I just had to like
yeah,
include
right?
that because it's so relevant.
Yeah, so like you think the world is ending, but it's not. And until and like I still think there are people left to capitulate, and like CJ said as well, I think there's still a lot of money left on the sidelines. So the fact that we didn't get a rate hike now just to me means like we could plausibly see the market continue to run even further uh, as people still remain bearish, and it'll be interesting tomorrow to see that COT data to see how those traders are positioned. But I still expect that a lot of people are bearish and expecting a correction in tech stocks, and are going to be greatly disappointed when they continue to grind higher and force them to close those puts.
Yeah, I think many are confused at the FOMC news, and it's funny. We were also extremely confused near the bottom as well. Back in late 2022, a lot of people we'd only raised rates like a couple percentage points. I think 1 to 2 at that point. We're at like 5 now. So it's I think it's going to take some digesting. But let's go ahead and dig into the charts now. Let's talk about some price action. We'll talk about, of course, crypto and equities. Which one of you guys wants to go first? We kind of hopped around crypto and equities now, so maybe let's do Monty with Bitcoin and ETH and whatever else he's looking at. And then let's move it over to the equity side of things.
Let's do it. Let's do it. Yeah. Well, if you want to go ahead and yeah, okay, there we go. I mean, not much to say about Bitcoin that we haven't already said, right? Nick, I think you pointing out that massive divergence between just a general lack of spot buyers and just perpetual futures participation points out just the weakness that we're seeing here at this level, and that's not very encouraging. 25K is a critical level. If we lose this level, I think we just continue to bleed out down towards 23.7 would be the next level of major support, and I think we could hit it sooner than later. The thing that's kind of propping us up right now, I think, is the fact that the equity markets are performing well, and it's just like it's very disappointing to see Bitcoin just doing nothing while equities are ripping. But at the same time, like look at these two charts, right? Which one are you going to put your money in? Like people are participating in the queues because that's where the action's at. There's no action in Bitcoin right now. And if you look at the chart, you can see that the action does occur, but it occurs very quickly and in a very short amount of time. It's not like the queues where it will just
gradually and then all at once, right, Monty?
Yes, exactly. So it's like with Bitcoin, I feel like we're going to have some more negative price action before we start to see any positive price action. And what we're going to need is a short squeeze. That's been the catalyst to most of these big moves up that have propelled us out of, what have been bear markets, is when people start to get overwhelmingly short. And we're still not at that level yet. Like decent volume, but as you can see, actually more longs than shorts right now. So basically, there's a slight premium being paid if you want to get long Bitcoin, which is pretty interesting, and a relatively low amount of liquidations over the last 24 hours. So not a lot of catalyst for negative price action.
If you're long right now, be careful. I just have to say that. I mean,
yeah, I would agree with that
I hate to
sentiment.
be that guy who's just, is the doom and gloom. But if I'm seeing that at this level with the price action that we had overnight, and but the BlackRock ETF news barely did a dent.
Yeah.
It's a little worrisome. Like, I feel like this is like, we're talking about a short squeeze, but the squeeze can come in the opposite direction, because I think the one part that your chart doesn't show is that the shorts from back up 26, 27 haven't really closed much. We saw a little bit of closing before the show today, but not much. And that's typically the biggest sign.
Absolutely. And look at, we saw that in other assets, right, that had some overwhelmingly negative price action in the last week. We saw short covering. Didn't see that at all in Bitcoin, right? Pretty much, we're still flat down here. So that tells me that we could plausibly see a bit of short covering, but the fact that, right now people are getting long and, we have long stacking up, that makes me worried a little bit that we could see, maybe a flash crash down to 23.7 on the back of the liquidation of those longs. But moving on, another thing that I wanted to talk about, because I don't want to short Bitcoin. I always say that, even if I'm anticipating a flash crash down to 23.7, I still think there's better ways to play that via the altcoin market. And one thing that in particular I think is looking really interesting right now, even though it's down 4.2% today, is Aave. And there's some interesting news around Aave and Curve that has broken this week. So basically on Monday, Aave put out this proposal to freeze Curve's loans because Curve's value has dropped so much that they're approaching their liquidation levels, where it essentially be margin called, and they would have to pay back the rest of the money to Aave that they borrowed. It's upwards of 160 million, and right now their collateral is only worth 60 million. So if you think about what that means, it means that the Curve token is massively levered up. And that's dangerous. And what actually happened is the founder had to use $24 million of his own funds, which is pretty laughable because all that does is dilute the supply, to pay off Aave, to not freeze their assets and to allow them to continue to operate even further. But whenever I see something like this happen, it tells me, the writing's on the wall that this isn't something that's going to last forever. And with Curve's continued negative price action, they're going to be unable to pay back that loan. That's just something that, to me, seems inevitable. And Aave looks particularly vulnerable. If they lose that $160 million, that would be a big hit to their protocol, and to the whole idea of a lending protocol in general, right? The whole lending market would be hurt if we saw this massive of a default in the DeFi space. So I think Aave, the fact that it's, coming up against this critical level where we've seen it bounce a few times, being the $50 level, it's a nice round number as well. I think we see some pretty negative price action on the back of this news that's breaking, and I don't think we've seen the worst of it yet. So I have gone ahead and taken on a short Ave position. Going to continue to
Uh-oh.
ride this. Going to continue to ride this one. Uh, you know, it is a bit crowded, which I don't typically like to do in terms of my short trades, because then you are more susceptible to those violent squeezes. But if I start to see any signs of positive price action, I would just cut this thing above 50, because you have some nice defined risks. So wait for it to clearly break below 50, and I think this thing will really start to run to the downside on the back of that negative news around Curve and their potential inability to pay back the loan that they owe to Ave. So that's
And the curve price action has been pretty abysmal. Talk about a squeeze. Any token that is shorted as bad as Curve is right now is obviously going to see some wild swings, but still down over the past 24 hours, I think. So that's honestly an interesting buy spike as well. That may be able to
yeah.
be retraced. I actually prefer your trade on Aave than Curve, because I think everybody's been way too quick to Curve, and therefore the difficulty in swing trading is I think Aave presents a better opportunity, at least as we speak right now. I could be wrong, but I think Curve has had more attention than Aave in this saga.
That's been reflected in the funding rates of these two assets as well. If you wanted to enter a Curve short in the last 48 hours, the funding was significantly negative. I think it reached at one point like over 2%. So like to get into a short trade, like you're taking a pretty steep haircut. Ave today is playing a little bit of catch up, but I still think that this news is worse than people think. I think that there is more downside price action imminent for Ave as we see this story develop further. So this is one that I'm in, and that I think we could plausibly see, because below this level, really, like there's nothing. There's no support.
It's crazy. Like, well, I'm
So
gonna pull up my chart just for a second, because look
yeah.
at where the lows are for Curve. It's at 27 cents, right around there. So a 50% haircut takes you to the lows, which and if anybody was reading some of the meme tweets about CRV, I thought it was funny that the crypto Twitter guys were joking about, like, and in parentheses, almost never happens, in reference to a token dropping 30-50% or whatever. But I mean, in this case, this is a pretty down bad chart. This is very Sol ecosystem-esque, and let's look at Aave too. So they're both, that's what worries me a little bit about shorting, is obviously this is when things can get hairy, but also very much agree with Monty. Like, I think these lows are certainly in our sights for the summer of 2023. So
And what narrative has been beat up more than lending and borrowing? Like just the concept in general of lending and borrowing has destroyed this market over the past 6 months. Like that, Bitcoin and ETH in general have taken such a bad hit, and that's why they're not moving with the Qs, right? Like, all that FTX drama and whatnot. Until that still is prevalent, and I think that is a reason why we're seeing a lack of spot buyers. I think that's a reason why we're underperforming in general. So yeah, we have that, and then the regulation news is like no positive catalysts. So for the meantime, the only way to look is to the downside, and I think that right now Aave is presenting some of the best asymmetric risk. So
it's funny, we had a stablecoin DPEG this morning as well, right?
I think USDT DPEG slightly, yeah, by like 0.005 cents, something like that.
Yeah.
But CJ's been patiently waiting. Let's bring up his stream and figure out what he's talking about. So looks like we got what is that, 5-year Treasury note?
Yeah, ZF, the 5 years.
Treasury is the recent narrative. I guess China is getting ready to sell a large batch of treasuries allegedly. Does that kind of related to your analysis, or am I jumping the gun here?
That could be interesting, but I don't know how much immediate market impact that will have in like the next week or so. The reason why I like this trade specifically from yesterday and kind of following up on that rates discussion we were talking about earlier, the fact that like, you know, rates weren't lowered, there was just a pause, and the illusion that there will be, or Jay Powell alluding to the fact that there will be no cuts throughout the end of the year. Like that probably should have been pretty bearish for this particular chart, but we've seemed to have actually closed up and shown some resilience and have defined some risk. So the reason why I chose the 5 years, 2 years have been trading pretty well too towards the front end of the curve, but 5 years are the most crowded in terms of fixed income shorts. So I just thought this was an interesting one, especially following yesterday's price action where given what happened, we probably should have closed much lower, like down here, but it was a decent reversal candle. Other than that, I mean, I've just been kind of shilling Coinbase, not using it, but I've just been talking about it in terms of a stock. I published one of my first trading view ideas ever, and it's let me bring it up real quick.
Oh man.
So it's a very simple thesis, but I like it. And that's the other thing that I think is pretty beautiful about coins. Like I checked it in the after hours last night and it was like up. Well, all this other shit was just dying basically. So it's nice when your altcoin can be listed on the NASDAQ, I guess. Kind of, you know, less prone to Asia dumping, perhaps. Doesn't mean it's not prone at all, but I thought that was nice to see that resilience, despite the fact Bitcoin in the market was selling off pretty hard last night.
Yeah, that was something I wanted to bring up. So let's break down for people in the audience who are like hearing us. You know, we're not very, very bullish on Bitcoin, Ethereum, or altcoins, but you know, CJ is presenting what he believes to be a potentially bullish opportunity for coin. Now, coin makes money off of volatility and volumes, which translate into fees and among other things, but you know, large majority of revenues from fees. Increased volume is good, but you know, also fear of investors, you know, buying into the market may only mean a very short-term profit boost or revenue boost. So what do you think is the general bull case here, CJ, if you are generally bearish on Bitcoin and Ethereum, to just kind of use that as the proxy for the crypto market?
Is it too simple to just say that it's an altcoin listed on the NASDAQ?
No, I mean, hey, narrative is narrative. I just want to understand what your thought process is, because I'm sure people in the audience are like, well, they're kind of saying two different things. So
yeah, well, listen, the way I see it, like with all the regulatory uncertainty surrounding Coinbase currently, that is something that could be a potential catalyst. And there are two potential outcomes for this whole lawsuit, right? Either one, Coinbase loses their ability to sell any crypto assets here, and they are forced to go overseas. And they've talked about opening a perpetual futures exchange overseas. That in itself is something that I find very bullish, because there's a lot more money to be made in a perpetual futures exchange than there is running a whatever they are now.
Especially with Binance's brand issues right now.
Yeah, right. And Binance is, so that market is there. There's a demand for that. And I think if they successfully set up operations abroad and open up a perpetual futures exchange, they'll start printing money. And that's something that people maybe aren't thinking so much about, is like, even if the SEC lays down the law and like hits them with the book, then they go overseas and they make a fortune. So I think either way you look at it, you know, this lawsuit could be kind of a win-win for Coinbase, in the sense that they get to keep operating the way they are, and they win the lawsuit, and that would result in a bump in the price of Coinbase significantly, I would imagine. And then two, the potential for that overseas perpetual futures exchange. I mean, I don't need to tell you why those print money. People get liquidated.
Yeah, because
left
they
and right.
take all of our money. Oh no, the Pittsburgh
I know
Steelers.
I know that's embarrassing, but
That's indicative of how their
the
season's gonna go.
the command strips don't work, and the door is not thick enough to like throw a nail. Whatever, we can. I'm editing this part out anyway. So
And just to talk about that dichotomy by kind of being bearish alts throughout the end of the month. I still believe that. I'm totally firm through that idea. I just think longer term, if you think about the worst thing that could happen to Coinbase, and there's always a worst case, but relatively speaking, the SEC suing them and Binance within a week is like horrible. So the fact that the price dropped 10 to 15% off that news, I think it was a good buying opportunity in the short term. One, because it seems like they have a pretty good case. And this perp exchange that they're going to open up is likely going to print money, going to be Binance's loss, will likely turn into Coinbase's gain. So, I have started, kind of scaling in, but I definitely do want to buy some more coin stock in July once all this like altcoin selling nonsense is, kind of through with. So I have no problem having like a small, like beginning to build a small coin position for like 2024, 2025. And then potentially shorting some of these alts as well to kind of like hedge it in the short term. But overall, it doesn't have to be Coinbase, but I've been telling Monty this and talking with our community. It's like, given the fact of how beat down all of these assets have been, it kind of is starting to remind me of when ETH went to like $80 in 2018. So
Yeah.
There's going to be opportunities for next cycle, but what's going to be still functioning and not bankrupt, and then also doesn't have massive amounts of bag holders.
what's going to be functional and not bankrupt should be the first question we ask ourselves on the next crypto cycle, because I don't think any of us asked ourselves that in 2020. But no, I mean, you make a good point. And it wasn't that I'm bearish coin. I just looking for that full explanation there. And if it is, hey, it's going to be a meme stock, then, we watch GameStop pump on some crappy operational news too. So it's not like it's unheard of. And they do have a bull narrative in the future, because I think Coinbase is the most set up to slap the SEC silly in court. So
We
all
like it to
violence.
475. So
So, anything else, CJ? Or are you just looking at Treasury? Like, well, let's actually talk about equities right now. Let's talk about SPY. Let's talk about the Qs. Because personally, I was just talking in the TTC community last night. Obviously, vindicated on my bearish crypto outlook, but I wasn't staunchly. I was like, I could be proven wrong if we break above resistance. We'll add some longs. But I really thought, based on the price action overnight and into the morning before we saw that pop like an hour after futures open, I really thought we were going to probably form a lower high or some sort of double top. So we're chugging along. Let's pull up the chart, because, let's get a little bit specific. And, SPY again, I mean, I drew this resistance level thinking it would take until maybe Friday to hit. And here we are breaking above yet another resistance level. And how far up are we from the lows of, so market opened right around here. Let's just pull it from the lows. We're up 1.86% on futures today after a hawkish pause. And I think very few people had this big of a bet in their head. I did hear some people saying, I'm going to reverse whatever the immediate FOMC reaction was. So if you obviously bought on this dip, you're extremely happy today. But where does this end? Does this keep going? What's the signal for the sell-off? Because I think everybody and their brother's asking that right now. Or are we asking the wrong questions? Should we just be saying what could stop us instead of what will stop us?
I think we'll keep going up until people think we can't go down. Monty, you want to bring up the Livermore accumulation chart for this?
Yeah, of course.
I'm sorry for all my white lines here, but I mean, I've got resistance all the way up to mid 4,600 for equities. And we've been slicing through these resistance levels. So I'll bring up Monty's chart.
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of going into trend following, right? Okay, so I mean, we talk about this, it seems like every day because it's so, relative to where the market's at right now. But, a lot of people have thought that we were at the 10 point throughout the past few months, but in reality, we're just at the 8 points. And so, yeah, we are probably somewhere between 8 to 10, but there's really no reason to sell it yet, or at least short it until we make the lower high, which is the 12 point. I remember very clearly, after these parabolic runs in the DXY, first lower high, it ended up being a good opportunity to really go short. That was the end of the trend. Same thing with Bitcoin at 31,000 or 30K, however high it went. The first lower high that we formed, which would have been equivalent to the 12 point, that's where you want to test before selling short. So nobody knows how high the market can go. Like, look at the Nikkei bubble in the 90s. I mean, everybody knew it was a bubble, but it just kept going up for years. And that's prevalent within Japan's culture. But you got to wait till the 12 point, at least in my opinion, because this year has just been a graveyard of short traders. So
and for those who don't know, and then kind of what I was referencing is lower high, which is what the 12 point represents. Correct, CJ, is a lower high.
We're on the same page.
Yeah.
It's TA.
So
it's very simple things.
Yeah, with that thesis in mind, when I was talking last night, I was expecting a lower high today, which would have been an opportunity to jump into some puts or shorts, which I didn't see. And obviously, we're headed higher. So I do agree with CJ. That's a really good way to look at it. Instead of looking for a single news event, just pay close attention to price action. And now, I guess on the other side of things, if you are feeling FOMO, Monty and CJ, do you jump in? Do you buy some calls? Do you do anything bullish? Because we don't know how high this is going to go, but it has rejected pretty much all of the bear opportunities, I should say, so far. So is there anything that would catch your eye from a bullish perspective, considering that the trend is seemingly up right now?
Yeah, well, take a look at this Microsoft chart. Microsoft, I mean, we can talk all day about the S&P 500, but literally 400 of those names, like 495 of those names, like don't even matter. Big tech is what's leading this rally, and big tech will be when the time comes. This will be the place to look for any sign of the market slowing down. It will come from big tech, and we aren't seeing that at all. Microsoft coming up against all-time highs and basically smashing through them today, up over 3%. And the reason for this, we could speculate about why they're up so big, but I still think it's the AI narrative and also people trying to call the top. They saw this reversal candle here and they're like, okay, this is it. This is the time to get short. And then eventually those puts just get crushed and we see a massive run up. And I don't think this is the end of the run up for Microsoft by any means. One thing I actually talked about today that's kind of anecdotal and it may not matter that much, but like Bing has been around since 2008 and nobody uses Bing, right? Like everyone uses Google. Nobody uses Bing. But they've recently integrated AI into their search engine and you can ask it to do things for you much like you can with ChatGPT. And I this morning during our show, like set an example. I'm like, so like you can ask it to like write a poem about soccer players that wear the jersey number 10. And someone in our community went out and actually had it do it. And it's actually it's a good poem. Like it's good. It rhymes and it names like 5 major players. It's actually a good poem. But I think that AI narrative is still very much the reason why we're seeing some of these names take off. Then also Meta, this is one that we've talked about in the past as, one, this gap getting filled. We're almost there. But beyond that, Apple's venture into augmented reality, I think, was just further validation. And I said this in our webinar yesterday, but if you didn't watch, or if you don't watch Lex Friedman's podcast, I think you should check out his interview with Mark Zuckerberg as maybe your first one, because it was a really good interview and kind of insightful for what Meta wants to do in the future, and how he reacted to the news of Apple releasing their own pair of augmented reality goggles. And essentially he sees it as validation for the space. And I tend to agree with him. And also, Apple didn't mention anything about gaming in their talk of the augmented reality goggles. They seem more enterprise focused. So not necessarily.
I feel like Meta and Apple are kind of looking at two different markets for their products. Like Meta seems more retail, Apple seems more B2B, but both could probably fit in either sector depending on, future models.
Yeah, most definitely. And the price point alone of the goggles being $3,600 when an Oculus Quest is $400. I mean, and like that's, I'm talking about the newest generation of like the Oculus. Like that's kind of a no-brainer in terms of what to buy if you're looking to game. But anyways, I think watch these names. When these names start to show this sort of price action, when we see that 12 point from some of these big names, that's when I'm willing to, throw in the towel and say, okay, I don't think these can go any higher. Full disclosure, I am currently long Meta. I have been since, I don't know, I think I talked about the day I opened it on the show, but I'm planning on getting out the day before earnings, or the weekend before earnings, this Friday, the 21st. And this is plausibly when we could see an end of the rally. It's not necessarily because I don't want to play the guessing game with earnings, because as you can see, it's been kind of a mixed bag. Sometimes they miss and it goes down. Sometimes they miss and it goes up. So I'm not trying to play that binary event, but for now, this melt up looks more than sufficient to enter some, either I would say today the best thing to do would be, buy a call spread and maybe aim for like 320 at the upper side of it. Because that's where I could see Meta heading in the immediate future by this date here of Friday, July 21st. So that's kind of what I'm looking at. And I think these big names keep going up because, like CJ said, it's been essentially a graveyard of short traders. And until we see that sentiment shift, I am, just going to keep riding these assets up because big tech looks strong. But people keep calling it weak. And until that changes, I think it keeps just ripping to the upside.
Speaking of ripping to the upside, we did get a bit of a Bitcoin squeeze here. So just to go ahead and point you to the stats that we're looking at, we are seeing some coordinated spot buying. Coinbase, it seems like Binance is way more interested than anyone else, but we had a bit of it looks like Coinbase actually sparked the rally along with Binance, and now we've got Bitfinex and some others diving in. So we'll have to see how this lines up. But I mean, talking about the CBD references, and this is why we don't just recommend just diving into shorts when you see the price action that we mentioned, because like I mentioned, spot has indeed caught up to perps in terms of this situation. So what we would look for is probably some coordinated spot selling to then enter some shorts. And then we'd obviously look for perps to follow that up. So, in my opinion, I'll say this until, until we get back to the range that we were at on Wednesday. But I think that if any squeeze that you see to the upside is likely shortable. But I wouldn't recommend, again, just jumping into shorts, diving into the deep end of the pool. Wait to see some price actions form, maybe a doji candle, maybe a swing failure pattern, something that is indicatively bearish, because I don't trust this spot selling, and Coinbase has been the majority seller. So we'll see if they kind of jump into the selling first, but it definitely seems to be at least a legitimate temporary rally. And I have a feeling that it's kind of related to this news, because right when we got this news, I saw Matic dump along with 80. Matic dumped way more than anything else, but a lot of those, mentioned coins in the lawsuits took a hit, and then look, Bitcoin and Ethereum are up the most, or have obviously the most buy interest right now. So we'll see if this is kind of just a short term thing. I mean, this is the only reason I could draw of a news event as to why we would squeeze. Other than the fact that, Monty did mention that there have been more longs outstanding. So we'll see if those longs close and or the shorts close, because obviously a nice OI reset would give us confidence that maybe the current range we're sitting in is the right range for a day to maybe a week. But if we get a lot more OI, we'll have to see what direction that's in, because it does look like we are in a mini squeeze right now. So we're gonna go ahead and wrap it up, I think, here, because we did talk about a lot. But CJ, Monty, on the topic of the recent price action just now, any take on that? Because obviously some more volatility while we're talking. So
yeah, I think just this could be, a translation of the positive price action in the equity markets and the fact that, we have big tech names breaking into new all-time highs. Risk on environments are good for Bitcoin. Although Bitcoin has been, massively underperforming, like I mentioned, the fact that we're seeing, big tech names make new all-time highs, that to me declares this a risk on market. And I think people are starting to wake up to that fact that if these big tech names are making all-time highs, then why can't Bitcoin start to run? And I think that's starting to maybe be the narrative, is rather than and it goes back to what we talked about with like sentiment shifting. Everyone has been so negative this entire way up, but now I think people are actually starting to flip positive, and starting to think about the continued upside of these big tech names, and as a result are maybe willing to take a shot on Bitcoin as well, because like we said, when it moves quick, and you don't want to miss those moves. So maybe some people are just trying to get ahead of that.
Final question: are you guys shorting any squeeze or any spike on these coins, or are you playing it patient with no bias?
I'm playing it patient. I'm going to wait and see what Asia does tonight. I think that'll be very important for what we get tomorrow. So I'm still just patiently waiting. I'm short Ave, like I said. I'm also long Meta, and that's it. That's literally it right now. So besides that, I'm flat entirely, and I'm just going to be patient and just wait.
Okay. I kind of agree. My bias is currently wanting to short probably any oversold RSI on a low time frame right now. Probably looking, closer at 15-minute, 1 hour, not, paying too much close attention to the 5 minutes. But bias is currently wanting to short. But, like we said, going to check out that OI, going to see what continued spot interest looks like. Because if this is just all the buying we get, it ain't going to last. So, something to keep watch of there. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. Monty or CJ, go ahead and please let us know how to reach Market Rebellion.
Yeah, you can find us at that link right down below you, or right down below me, at marketrebellion.com/try crypto. We are a community of traders from all around the world, and CJ and I run a chat room where we share our insights with traders. We also do a daily show and a weekly member webinar where you can ask questions. So check it out. It's just $1 to try it. And like I said, you can try it at markrebellion.com/try crypto.
All righty. Thank you so much, Monty. And with that, you can also try out tradethechain.com. We have a 14-day free trial. Link is below. And we do have some fun and exciting things coming up with Monty and CJ and the Trade the Chain community. So expect to hear a little bit more news about that in the near future. And Bitcoin tagging 25.4K as we speak. So we'll see you guys next Monday and as well as Thursday, every Monday and Thursday to break down everything going on. You heard it here first. Let's see if these trades work out, and good luck to everybody listening and watching over the weekend. We wish you the best of luck in all of your trades. So happy trading.